Am I allowed to say, Eddie?
I'm scared of it.
Is that pretty good, Colonel?
Excellent. Carry on.
Okay. Just a couple of business things before we start. The West Shore Evangelical Free Church at 114 Market Street, Mechanicsburg, is having a World War II program tomorrow night. And I don't know how many of you are over that way, but the lady who called and said that a couple of World War II veterans would be more than welcome. The program is going to be on World War II. So any of you fellows live over that way, they said you were welcome to attend.
Where was that again, Bill?
Fred, I don't know whether you'd want to go there. It's a church. West Shore Evangelical Free Church, 114 Market Street. Okay, and I have one commercial for one of my Timberwolves. John Light came over from the other side of the river, and he was one of our first speakers, and he has his books for sale over here. John was a Silver Star Timberwolf, 104th Division. So with that, go ahead and introduce our speaker. I've known him for about 30 years now, more as a tennis player than as a World War II veteran. But when we were in the middle of the 50th anniversary, I was putting together a display for the Hershey Library, the old one, and I heard about this fellow that he'd flown just a few missions over Japan. I think 23, check?
Right.
23 missions in the B-29. And one of the things that fascinated me, and I hoped you'd bring him tonight, they had a tradition that when they flew each mission, the bombardier gave everybody in the crew one of the nose tags off the bombs.
They're over there in the table.
Oh, they're over there? You got them. Okay. Well, then take a look
I
at
don't have
that.
all of them. I lost about 7 of them.
But that's something rather unique he's got over there. And I brought something in for him to see tonight. You know, the crazy things that we World War II military guys run into. Those 3 aluminum boxes back there on the table, the one with the gyro in the middle, that's the automatic pilot out of a B-29. Those missions were so long, and I'm sure Chick can tell you about it, that they were so fatiguing that an automatic pilot was a welcome addition to their equipment. And I'm not going to tell you exactly where I got it, but I've had it for a while. So with that, I'd like to introduce Chick Rice of Hershey, 20th Air Force, and I'll let him take it from there. Chick?
Thank you, Bill. First, I want to apologize for sitting down. I have a bad back. So this is where I'm going to be during the talk. The Boeing B-29 Super Fortress is one of the most modern bombers ever made. Well, it was the best one when it was made in back there in the early 40s. It has a pressurized cabin, fore and aft, and in the tail gunner's compartment. That means it's just like walking around in an airliner at 30,000 feet. And those poor guys like Ed here in B-17 Fortress, they had to wear boots with heaters in them and heavy coats. And it was just, I pitied them, to tell you the truth. But I guess they kept busy because they had enough guys chasing them up there. But Ed was a ball turret gunner, and I don't envy him having that job. The B-29 had 5 sets of remotely controlled guns. Bombardier, the CFC, or the Central Fire Control gunner, the left blister gunner, the right blister gunner, and the tail gunner. None of the gunners can see their guns. They just have something that has crosshairs in it. They stick that on the airplane and then shoot. So it's pretty sophisticated. The CFC gunner can take control of any gun or give control of any gun to others. In case somebody gets wounded or they couldn't shoot their guns, he could give that to somebody else. Or maybe shoot himself. So as I said, they just have to put the crosshairs on the enemy planes, track and shoot. They don't have to lead the target like you probably did in the B-17s and the B-24s. So all over that area, when they bombed Japan and so forth, there were 714 Jap fighters were shot down, 458 were probables, and 470 were damaged. So the gunners did a pretty decent job, I think. And the Japanese fighters didn't do too bad either, especially in the beginning of the war. More than 3,000 air crewmen were killed or missing in action from the B-29 planes. 433 surviving air crewmen were wounded. My squadron commander was shot down and captured before I got overseas. The first B-29s overseas were stationed in India, in the Kharagpur and which is near Calcutta. From there, they could bomb targets held by the Japanese, but they still couldn't make it to the Japanese islands. So from there, they bombed Singapore, Rangoon, Saigon, Bangkok, Formosa, and Kuala Lumpur. Then they decided they want to open up a base in China. But in order to fly from China to Japan, they had to lift all the fuel and all the bombs and everything over the hump, that's over the Himalayan mountains. And then later, they would take their planes over there and load them up again with fuel and bombs and then go to their other targets. And in the bases they worked out of China were near Shangtu. And there's some pictures in that blue book over there, the history of the 20th Air Force, where you see maybe a couple hundred Chinese dragging some equipment around. So they say here in that book that there's 400,000 Japanese were used to make the runways on these airstrips near Shangtu. In fact, there's one picture in there of maybe 50 Chinese women, most of them women, down on their hands and knees with scrub brushes cleaning the runways. So the B-29s were loaded with fuel and bombs and made bombing missions to Japan, Shanghai, and to Manchuria, where the Japanese held. There were 21 missions from China before the B-29s were then sent to the Marianas. And meanwhile, just take time out and not continue there, and to tell you what I was doing. I graduated from navigation school at Selman Air Force Base, Monroe, Louisiana. And I was sent to Boca Raton, Florida for about 4 weeks to learn to master the then secret APQ-13 radar system, which was in the B-29s and used for navigation and bombing. But bombing with that wasn't too good. Sometimes the weather was so bad, that you couldn't see down through the clouds, so you had to try to drop by radar. But the airs usually weren't too close to it. I mean, the airs were big, is what I'm trying to say. After Boca Raton, we went training to Cuba. We had our crew training there at Batista Air Force Base in San Antonio, Cuba. That was before, what's his name, took over down there.
Evidently.
Then from there, we came back to our bases in Kansas, and then we went to Kearney, Nebraska, and picked up a new B-29 and flew over to Guam. So now I'm in Guam, and all these other aircraft from China and who used to be in India, they were also there. So we're all together, all 5 wings of the B-29s on Guam, Tinian, and Saipan. Guam being the biggest island, Tinian the smallest, and Saipan, I think, had more aircraft on it. But Guam had other things besides B-29s. There was another bomb group there. I was in the 314th bomb group, the 330th. I was in the 314th bomb wing in the 330th bomb group. And there was also another bomb wing, 315th, located there, plus the 20th Air Force headquarters and a big Navy base, which was the main U.S. Navy base in the Western Pacific. I'll talk a little bit about Iwo Jima. The taking of Iwo Jima was a godsend for the B-29 crews, situated about midway between the Marianas and the Japanese islands. It was taken to provide an emergency landing area for B-29s low on fuel, those damaged by enemy flak or fighters, and for B-29s in need of maintenance. It also provided for a fighter base, P-51s mostly. There were some P-61s there too, the night fighter. What's that called? Black Widow?
Black Widow.
Over 2,400 B-29s made emergency landings at Iwo Jima. Now you can imagine with 11 aircrew members on each ship, that amounted to about 25,000 men. So they owe a huge debt to the Marines. The Marines saved many lives and many B-29 bombers with their heroism in the battle for Iwo Jima. In this costliest battle of World War II, 4,891 Marines lost their lives and over 17,000 were wounded. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz said of their courage and sacrifice, uncommon valor was a common virtue. And in the 313th bomb group, there was a B-29 called the Spearhead. Any ex-Marines in here? Hey, there's one.
I was one to help you out state.
Oh, yeah. Hi, how you doing? Well, anyways, this B-29 was called the Spearhead, and it had a picture of the raising of the flag on Mount Suribachi printed on the side, painted on the side of it. Our flight crew flew a B-29, K-39 was the number, and the name of it was the city of Hershey. Our whole group, 3 squadrons, named their airplanes after cities. And since we had 4 or 5 Pennsylvania guys on our crew, the aircraft commander let us name it, so we named it City of Hershey. General LeMay changed the missions procedures from flying at high altitude, which is around 30,000 feet, down to 12 and 16,000. And we were on our first, we called it low level. We were bracketed by at least 4 searchlights, and soon the flak was exploding all around us. It hit a pressurized fire extinguisher about 5 feet back of me, and we then had a whiteout throughout the aft compartment. The right gunner was wounded and subsequently received a Purple Heart. There were 14 holes in our airplane when we landed at Iwo Jima. Our crew had 25 missions. I have bomb pins from most of those missions, and they're over there on the table, 17 of them. first A-bomb on Hiroshima was August the 6th, but that didn't end the war. And the atomic bomb on Nagasaki was August 9th, and that didn't end the war. There were regular B-29 missions for the next 7 days. And the reason for that is there was a hardcore Japanese military faction trying to wrestle control of the emperor, I guess, because he made a recording of the surrender speech, and he had it hidden by some of his faithful people that worked with him. And these guys were all over the place. In the end, there was a lot of guys that did harry-carry and shot themselves, and some shot each other. And finally, the emperor was able to have the tape delivered to this station, and I played it. And that was the end of the war then. Because once the emperor said it's over, it's over. Another thing that many of you never heard of probably is the missions of mercy. After the war, from August 27th, 45 to September 45, there were 1,066 B-29s participating in mercy missions to the 154 prison camps throughout Japan and Manchuria that had 63,500 prisoners. They dropped 4,470 tons of food, medicine, clothing, water, cigarettes, candy, etc. The tragedy of this was that 8 B-29s and 77 crew members were lost. They never recovered them. And oddly enough, one of the fellows that lost his life was my cousin, who was a gunner on a B-29 on Tinian. And I didn't even know he was there. My mother wrote to me and said that he was killed. They ran into a mountain. But the Japanese helped them out, and they dug out the bodies and sent them back. And he's buried near his hometown, near Chicago. I'll just add a few things that I got out. I stayed in for one more year after we brought the aircraft back here on a bomb tour. Landed at Milltown. There's pictures of the airplane over there on the left, and some of you may be old enough to remember the Hershey Hotel Highlights, which is our hometown paper, I guess you call it. There's copies of that over there that tells about our aircraft. And so I got out at the end of 46. And when I got out, I stayed in the Air Force inactive reserves. So I was out for 5.5 years, went to school, married my wife, and in 1952 I was called back in. So I went in, and I stayed in. And lo and behold, I was crewed up again on a B-29, but it was a reconnaissance aircraft. So guess where I got stationed? In Japan. But they weren't mad at me. They didn't know who I was. But I got to tell you something funny that happened before I forget it. In my department in the back, there's we call it the putt-putt, but it was a
Starter age. Starter age.
yeah, something like that. I know the name of it, I just can't get it out. But before you land, you have to turn that thing on, and there's a lot of fumes and stuff, and it used to make me sick. So I'd get on 100% oxygen. It never bothered me. So one time, as you come down from the altitude to a place like Guam, it's pretty hot. So your bouncing around, smelling that stuff, and I could still smell it even though I was on 100% oxygen. And gosh, I was about ready to throw up, I think. And I looked down, I didn't have my oxygen hose plugged in. Oh, I got another ribbon about that. And the other thing is, this one gunner liked to play, we'd get out over the ocean away from Japan, we'd have hours to kill. Because those missions were anywhere from 12 to 14 hours long. So I played this one guy, Jin Romy, and he always beat the heck out of me. And I couldn't figure out how he did it. But the CFC gunner sits way up there. I'm down here. You guess what happened? He's looking at my hand and calling this guy up on the interphone. Tell me what I got. So we flew reconnaissance over Korea until the armistice was signed. I'll never forget listening to some of the ex-prisoners who were released being interviewed. They asked this one guy, "Did you have to attend those communist indoctrination courses?" He says, "No, but they were highly recommended." Then when that was after the war was, they had the armistice. So we thought we were going to come home. So they extended our stay over there for another 90 days. We had to fly classified reconnaissance missions up in the North Sea of Japan, right along the coast of Russia and part of China. So we did that for a few months. We were never shot at, but some of our guys that went up there were. They lost one or two, I think. So when I was done there, I came home, and they tried to crew me up on a B-36, yeah. Well, I didn't want any part of that thing. It looked like a motel going down the runway. It's so huge. So I volunteered to become a nuclear weapons officer. And I was in that up at Westover Air Force Base in Massachusetts. And we trained kids to load nuclear weapons into airplanes. And because there was going to be a B-52 base there, and they hadn't come in yet, so they had to practice. And they practiced on B-36s that would come up from Miami Air Force Base in Puerto Rico. And they had a, I guess you call it an ORI. They were being inspected to see if they were combat ready. And they got all these B-36s up there, and our guys, they couldn't get one nuclear weapon up in those airplanes. So I went out and looked at them, and we found out that they didn't have the right configuration in there. So it wasn't our fault. It was the guys down at Miami, the Arm and Electronic people down there. So I took a camera out there and took a bunch of pictures. So that saved our fannies. And then after I was there a couple of years, they said, "You're going to lose your flying status if you don't go back to get an upgrade in navigation and radar and so forth." So I went back out to Mather Air Force Base in California, near Sacramento, and went through that school. And when I got out of that, I was assigned at Whiteman Air Force Base on a B-47 crew. B-47 was a medium jet bomber with 3 crew members. It could go a little faster than the B-29s, believe me. So there were 2 pilots and me. I'm up in the nose. So I'm the navigator, the radar, and the bombardier. Never have time to do anything else, not even eat. But that's the way it was. But we went on alert occasionally, and all air crews that were checked out and knew how to navigate in the bomb had targets in Russia. We had a Russian target. Thank God we never had to use it. But with the Cuban crisis, it did kind of stir things up a little bit. What they did was they took some of the B-27s to some public bases and put 2 or 3 there, 2 or 3 at another base. They spread them out. So if they did bomb any of us there, they wouldn't get them all. Then when that plane was taken out of the inventory, I stayed at Whiteman Air Force Base. That's where they got that big B-2 bomber, you know, a huge thing, looks like a bat almost. And I got into the Minuteman missile program. I was quality control and assistant quality control officer. And then eventually I got sent to Westover. What's that base we were at, Marion? Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, where I was in the 3901st Strategic Missile Evaluation Squadron.
What year is this chick? What year was it?
Well, we're getting up there in the 60s.
The 60s.
I'd say I was sent out there about 63 or 4, because I retired in 68, so I was out there 3 years, I guess, 3 or 4 years. And we evaluated all the Minutemen in the SAC inventory, Strategic Air Command inventory, and all of the Titan missiles. So I didn't get to be home very much. It was 2 weeks for each evaluation. You looked at everything, even see if they had toilet paper. No, it wasn't that bad. And then I retired from that base in 1968. Does anybody have any questions?
How many years did you have it all over there?
20.
20.
Made me eligible to retire.
Got some more questions for Chick?
Is that long enough?
There's one. Well, if you want to tell
Oh,
him,
yeah.
you want to tell him the stories about the girls in Japan that you told me.
I'll let you tell it.
We had a hand up back there. Fred.
When you were doing your bombing runs over Japan, what was you carrying? Bombs?
What type of bombs?
Yeah. And how many pounds?
If I was a bombardier, I can answer that. But they had a lot of fire bombs, incendiaries, where they'd open up and they'd spread out a whole mess of them at one time. I'm sorry about my voice. I'm losing it, I think. And sometimes they carried those big 250-pound bombs. Those are the only ones I know of. Okay?
Okay, now, yes, sir. Back in the back.
Yeah, I had a comment and question. First of all, I'm a former professor of Holocaust Studies at Penn State, and I wanted to thank all of you for what you've done for my generation and encourage you, not just the speaker, but everybody here, if possible, to share your experiences with younger people in high schools, colleges, and churches, because I think for a lot of my students, World War II experience is becoming way too remote. Way too remote. So not only am I here to acknowledge the
was your range?
Yeah, that's probably
Well,
the best way to put it.
from
Thank
the
you.
Marianas to Japan and back was roughly 3,000 miles.
So was it say that was 1,500?
1,500 back.
They didn't have refueling then, did they?
We never had it.
Were those all daylight missions?
They started out that way, but the bombing and the winds and everything was so bad. They had these up there at 30,000 feet. Occasionally, you'd run into these powerful jet streams, and sometimes, I mean, a lot of people don't believe this, but if they're coming in the right direction, you can't even make it to the target. You're almost like you're standing still. And sometimes they just couldn't do anything. And that's one reason. The other reason is that the bombing wasn't that good at that time. So they thought they'd go a little lower and maybe they could increase the percentage of targets hit.
Well, the other question I had was your main concern geography, or was it anti-aircraft resistance? You had mentioned that your cousin had flown into a mountain. I was wondering,
Oh, yeah.
what was more of a challenge for you in the plane, more of a concern actually?
Getting back on the ground.
Let me rephrase it. Before you got back on the ground, what did you fear more, the weather, the geography, or anti-aircraft?
Well, the weather between the Marianas and Japan, there was always a big front, and we had to go through that. So that's where they called on me, because in radar, when you get a storm on there, if it's real bright, you don't want to go in that area. So you try to pick a part of the storm where it's not as reflective, coming back to you.
You have a hole.
And we'd still get bounced around a good bit.
Thank you.
What percentage of your runs were over water?
All of them.
All of it? All the way?
Yeah.
In the Marianas, they had to.
Did they have any kind of air sea rescue for you?
Yeah, there was air sea rescue. Another thing I forgot to mention, that there were 3 submarines, and you could plot them on your charts where they're at on the route. So if you had some trouble, you could call them up and you could ditch near them. They'd pick you up. We had one crew from our group that was in lifeboats for 11 days.
Wow.
And I can't remember how they were spotted, but they got out of them. They were all right then. And a couple times submarines did get them and bring them back in.
Jim?
I got an article in some magazines that I got years ago regarding the 20th Air Force when they're flying out of India.
Yeah.
And one of their alternative safety routes was if they couldn't make it back to India, they could go into Russia. And the first one that landed in Russia was on I think the 29th of July 1944. Immediately the crew were interned and put into a prisoner of war camp. The plane was confiscated, and the next 4 or 5 were confiscated and stripped down, and Russia made an intensive program of building exact copies, and that became the Tupolev 104, which was the only Russian plane that could bomb America over the North Pole. And the title of this article is called $1 Billion Bomber, because it forced us to build the Dew line and all the radar stations against any attack from the north. And that was attributable to the B-29. Like as Peter said, there wasn't a plane like it at the time. The Russians learned pressurization, high altitude bombing, a whole lot of stuff from that.
Yeah, that's very. I have a CD that talks about that and shows the Russians made, I think, almost 800 or 900 copies, and first time we knew about it was our people were in Red Square. They were having one of those big parades, and they saw all these planes coming over. One guy said, "That looks like a B-29," and here was about 500 of them. You know? So they astounded our people.
That was on the History Channel a while back, a story about.
Yeah.
Colonel, do you have one?
Hi, I have two questions. First, your combat missions, how were they comprised? Did you fly wing or group? Were they just B-29s? And did you have P-47s and P-51s as your fighter escort? In other words, was it similar to the way they conducted their operations in the European theater? And what were the size of these missions? Was it a group or a wing? I mean, were we going over with 100 aircraft, 200,
Well,
300?
it wasn't. There weren't any standard things about how many planes. I mean, sometimes. I mean, I got that book there in the back has every mission they flew and tells you what bomb group, what bomb wing, and how many planes.
Was that determined by the target?
It could be.
Did you have to like circle around and get into a formation? Did you fly
Well,
those fixed formations?
Our first 5 missions were daylight missions up around 30,000 feet or a little higher. And then you'd circle and wait and then go in formation kind of. But later on when LeMay decided to have a lower level like I was talking about, then it was all single ship. You took off,
Single ship
single ship.
with fighter escort, or
No, it's not at night. These are all night missions. And, excuse me. We say you took off at 8 o'clock in the morning. First ship might be at 8,000 feet, and then the next one would be a couple thousand feet higher, and they'd stack them up vertically and horizontally. You know what I mean? And then after a while, they'd start at the same altitude again, so that, far enough away, that wouldn't hurt anything to get at that same altitude with another airplane. And they'd be maybe at even altitudes.
well, after all the consternation they had in Europe, of daylight bombing, why did the 20th Air Force go to night bombing?
Well, General LeMay made the decision to do that, and it worked out pretty good.
Was it because were you encountering heavier night fighter interception, or
No,
to negate the flak?
no, we still got flak,
Yeah.
but apparently it wasn't that good. It wasn't. We were up there, but at one time.
And what about your living conditions? Were you in tents? Were you in fixed buildings?
We were in Quonset huts. And,
How often would you have a mission? Were you able to rest in between, or was it dependent on the
about
weather?
10 missions a month, maybe. 8 to 10 missions a month.
Chick, B-29 was the first pressurized
Yeah,
bomber, was it not?
right.
It was pressurized, was it heated?
Oh, yeah. Just like walking around an airliner.
Really?
Of course, if you got hit with a big enough piece of flak, it's depressurized.
Yeah.
So you had to have be able to get your
Oxygen.
oxygen, that stuff. They had one case where,
Jim?
excuse me,
When you mentioned putt-putt, right away that brought a memory back. We were in North Africa, and we traded 4 bottles of scotch for a putt-putt engine out of a B-17. And we immediately wired up just about tents with a light. That lasted for about 4 hours until we were strafed and bombed. And the putt-putt was confiscated.
For those of you who hadn't been here before, this fellow that just speaks a little funny here, he's ex-RAF, North Africa with Wellington bombers and Italy with mosquitoes. We're going to get him to talk to us some night, too. Question all the way in the back.
be a good one.
You're,
Were most of your missions in
tried to get into the industrial part of each city that they bombed. I mean, that was the main purpose. But of course, with the Japanese type of building materials they had, you'd start a little fire and the whole town went up practically. Almost like they made
Jack?
a paper.
Did you encounter any fighter opposition? And did you see any Japanese fighters at all?
We did on our first 5 missions when we were in daylight, but we never saw any night ones. I don't think our guys even had to shoot at any of them. They didn't even come in that close.
What year was the B-29 put into service?
Put into the service.
Well, when it first engaged in combat, what year?
What year?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that off the top of my head, but it must have been
44.
Yeah. They had the 58th Bomb Wing out of China, and from taking stuff over the hump and then loading them up. That was in I think July. That'd probably be pretty close. July of '44. Bill.
Yeah, I have a question. You said that you flew into or out of India. How is the attitude of the Indian people towards the Americans?
Pretty good, I think.
Another gentleman
Because I
back here.
think all the people were paid by the Americans
Well,
probably to help build the airfield.
The reason I ask is, when my father was in West Africa, one day he was going down the streets of Algiers, when these Indian Sikhs, who were about 6, 7 foot tall, pick him up by the shoulders and they take him into the alley. And he's thinking, no, they just wanted their picture taken with an American GI.
Yes, sir, back here.
My brother said it was in Italy.
I just wondered if you had experienced any problems with the engine overheating or any mechanical problems that made it difficult for you to get back from your mission.
Yeah, they did. A lot of the bugs were taken out of it when they went over to India because they did have a problem there. They put the thing, into combat before it was really ready. There was many tech manual changes and stuff that they had to go through. By the time we got in, we were kind of tail end Charlies. We were the next to the last wing to go over there, and then there was one other one came after us. So most of the bugs are out of it by then, thank God.
Chick, what was the flying speed between the Marianas and Tokyo? How fast did they fly?
Trying to think. I think it was about 340. Yeah. Nautical miles per hour.
Ground speed.
Yes, sir.
The reconnaissance flights that you flew after the Korean conflict, were they over Manchuria, Russia, or North Korea, or where?
They were in the North Japanese Sea along the coast of Russia.
Okay. But you didn't do any reconnaissance over Russia at all?
No. They had kind of a, if we had an airplane that's faster than theirs or could fly higher, like the U-2 and that stuff, then they'd go in. But our plane wasn't that fast. So they didn't encourage us to go in.
Did you ever meet Kidd?
Who?
Paul Tibbets.
Yes, I have a picture over there of, he signed a picture to me. It's over there on the table. You're all welcome to look at that stuff when we break up here.
I got one for you, Chick. Is it any truth to the rumor that when the city of Hershey came back, you went over Hershey at about 500 feet?
I didn't fly it. I was watching for the smokestacks.
Yes, sir. Back
Did
there.
you use B-29s in Europe?
I don't think so.
No.
One up here.
Do you have any trouble rendezvousing with your fighter escorts?
No. Because they Stop right there at Iwo Jima. But there was an incident that happened when the fighters first came in there. They lived in tents, and the Japanese snuck down and slit the throats of about 12 of them.
My brother was there.
Wow.
Jack?
I know that, of course, all the B-29s had city of names.
Well, not all of them, just in our group.
Do you have any crew names as far as that, which on the other side of the plane?
Yeah, I think the AC had the Willful Witch.
Okay.
I think that was the other side of the plane.
Because I know that the Air Force always publicized the city of, but you know, like,
Yeah.
the crews didn't have some of their own names.
Gentleman back here.
I have a question, picking into the Korean War now. Do you have any information on when they flew out of Busan? I think it was Busan. I think it was one of those big bombers, but I think it was like F-86. He had four bombers each wing. I'm not sure about that. They would take off 25 at a time, and then when they come back, it would be like once a night you see one or two, and then once a night you see maybe two or three of them coming. You don't know anything, any information on that?
No, I wouldn't know anything about that.
All the way to the back.
Through my, I was curious, when you did your recon missions over northern Japan, were they was that to get intelligence about the Japanese military, or by any chance was that over the Russian
Well,
occupation?
it was
Some of the
part of the
Japanese
Cold
islands?
War. We were trying to get information from Russia.
Okay.
Because we also had ECM people that were, taping stuff that they'd pick up, and the radio would tape any type of verbiage that came over.
Anybody else? Oh, yes, sir, right front.
When they were flying out of China, you say they come in over the hump first?
No. They flew out, they were in India, and they flew over the hump from India to deliver to this stuff to this one base.
In China.
They'd stock up on fuel and
Yeah.
bombs and stuff, and then they'd go over there and load up and bomb Japan.
That had all be flown into China.
Yeah. Didn't work out too good.
All the way to the back. Yes, sir.
One thing that was fascinating me about the B-29 was the gunnery innovation. Turrets, as you mentioned earlier, were computer controlled. Now, from what I read about it, any gunner on board could control any one or all the guns depending upon what target was available. Now, did the computer determine how the guns were managed, or did the CFC do that?
Some of the fire control systems.
It was always my impression that one of the big innovations was the computer took care of that.
Well, there was a computer in there, but I think that was more or less to get the right things going when you were tracking the airplane. When you had the crosshairs on the target. But as far as who could control what gun, I think the CFC had control of that.
And you said you didn't have to lead the targets.
You
That was
didn't.
the whole thing. That was taken care of by the computer.
Yes, that part. Yeah, you couldn't. The gunners couldn't even see their own guns, except for the CFC. He could see the guns in front of him, but all the rest of them were out of sight.
They were looking at a screen.
Well, they were looking at the fighter with the crosshairs on him.
There's kind of like a camera on top of a mount, controlled something like this, correct? With the gun sight on top. Out of one of the blisters.
I don't know where the pictures were taken, but they're probably with the guns, I imagine. Because I don't think they were down there at the point, on the blister. They had a case where a plane was depressurized due to flak, and it blew out the blister in the one side. This gunner was hanging out there by one strap, and the other guys finally hauled him back in. There's a picture of that in that book over there, too.
kind of speed did you have to get up to before they'd go airborne?
I'm not a pilot. I couldn't answer that right now. I might have been able to answer it years ago.
90 to 96. 90 to 96.
Anybody else? If not, Chick, I thank you very much. Appreciate what you did. Before you go, our tradition, we don't have dues, so we pass the helmet. We don't pass the hat, we pass the helmet.
That's a hat. Oh, I gotta get up. I gotta stand up.
And take a look at this stuff here.
Mr. Light, Mr. Rose.